On its 75th anniversary summit, NATO wanted to portray one thing above all: unity. And the plan largely worked. Without much wrangling over semantics, all 32 members agreed on their final communiqué way before the end of the meeting. But the harmony might not last. The possibility of a second term for Donald Trump as U.S. president, an outspoken critic of the alliance and its support for Ukraine, has many members fearing the worst. Unsure of what NATO's future will look like, member states declared that Kyiv's future was indeed among them. Someday, somehow. But despite this promise and wide-reaching pledges of aid, Ukraine's Volodymyr Zelensky is likely to be leaving Washington disappointed. Restrictions on the use of long-range weapons on military targets in Russia remain in place. He had called their lifting a game changer. Here he is, speaking earlier on Thursday.
We, of course, if we want to win, if we want to prevail, if we want to save our country and to defend it, we need to lift all the limitations. I spoke about it with partners, with UK leader, with United States President, with Secretary, all of them.
And the United States will begin stationing long-range missiles in Germany from 2026. Washington and Berlin say the deployment cements their commitment to NATO and to European defense. The agreement includes Tomahawk, SM-6, and hypersonic missiles. The weapons are nuclear capable and have a range of more than 2,000 kilometers. They were banned under a treaty with Russia until the U.S. withdrew from that treaty 5 years ago. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz welcomed the decision.
That's, I think, is also an important result of this meeting, together with the decision to organize coordination in Wiesbaden in Germany, which I think is really a big step forward. Altogether, I think it is the right time for right decisions. I will add another aspect which is important for me. The United States decided to deploy deep precision strike capabilities in Germany, which I think is a very good decision, and it fits into all the decisions we already took.
Our Brussels Bureau Chief Alexandra von Nahmen joins us from the NATO summit in Washington. Alexandra, Scholz mentioned the city of Wiesbaden there. That's where NATO will set up a new command center. Is this a sign of Europe taking on more responsibility within the alliance?
Yes, I think that it's definitely a sign that the Europeans are willing and ready to take on more responsibility with the creation of this new NATO command in Wiesbaden. And also the fact that NATO as an alliance is ready to take on a leading role in coordinating military assistance to Ukraine and the training of the Ukrainian soldiers is also very significant. And according to Jens Stoltenberg, the NATO Secretary General, it is going to put military assistance to Ukraine on a firm footing. And all of that is, of course, part of NATO's plan to Trump-proof the alliance and its aid to Ukraine, because many in the alliance fear that Donald Trump, should he be elected again, could reduce America's security role in Europe and maybe even put an end to all military assistance to Ukraine. So they are trying to get prepared for that. But experts that I've been speaking with told me that Europe still is not able to replace the US and their help for Ukraine. So we will see how successful all those efforts will be.
Now, Alexandra, that deployment of long-range missiles in Germany, and what is that going to look like, and how significant will it be for NATO's security architecture here in Europe?
Well, Nicole, I think that this is very significant for Europe, but also, of course, in particular for Germany, because we are talking here about long-range missile capabilities, including, as you mentioned before, a Tomahawk missile that can go over 2,000 kilometers, a hypersonic missile, and other modern weapons that will be deployed temporarily in Germany in 2026, which is, of course, meant as a deterrent against any potential threats. Also, of course, Russia, and we have seen that they have already reacted, saying that this decision is a link in a chain of a course of escalation. But for Germany, this is a guarantee and a deterrent. And of course, that also is showing that the current administration is committed to NATO and to protecting European territory.
The current administration, but come November could well see a change in the White House. Is this something that could be undone by Donald Trump in his possible second term?
Well, if Donald Trump is elected, then of course, as a commander-in-chief, he will make his own decision. And that is something that is not being discussed here openly. But of course, behind the scenes, allies are trying to prepare their contingency plans. And there are discussions going on what it could mean for the alliance if Donald Trump gets elected again.
Ukraine gets money, at least 40 billion euros, and weapons, of course. Was everyone gathered in Washington in favor of this newest package?
Well, this package was approved long before the summit started, but it's of course not an easy decision for allies. Many of them have to deal with budgetary restraints, especially in Europe, and there is one member state that opted out of all military assistance, also financial assistance for Ukraine. It is Hungary. So even though the other allies were able to move forward without them, it is showing you that not all of them are on the same page.
That's Alexandra from Nahmen in Washington, D.C. Thank you so much. The Kremlin has reacted angrily to the announcement. Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov said it was clearly directed against Russia and vowed, quote, "Without nerves, without emotions, we will develop a military response." And I can now welcome Kristine Berzina, who's at the NATO summit in Washington. She's the managing director of Geostrategy North at the German Marshal Fund. She works on U.S., Nordic, Baltic, and Arctic security and defense issues. Glad you could join us today, Kristine. Now, how significant is this announcement that the U.S. will station long-range missiles in Germany starting in 2026?
This is a really important step forward for having a credible deterrent against Russia's aggression. When you look at what the summit declaration has announced, the first big block of text is all about having a real deterrent. Can NATO do what it said it's going to do? 2 years ago at the Madrid summit, there was a movement of political will and a promise to defend every inch. Last year in Vilnius, there were plans put in place about how to get the capabilities organized and resourced so that NATO can do what it said it could do. And now we're seeing that. We're seeing the ability of NATO to come together to defend its territory and to present a strong enough front that there isn't a question in any adversary's mind about whether the US and whether Germany, whether other allies are serious about defending their territory. And so deterrence is a matter of strength and about whether others can call the bluff. Political will, yes. But if you push, is there something scary that you are going to hit? And so this is an essential step for European security.
An essential step that hasn't gone down well in Moscow. The Russians have promised a military response. Should NATO be worried?
This is a NATO decision. This is a movement of resources that are within the alliance. This is tremendously far from Russia's borders. Meanwhile, Russia is attacking and shooting cruise missiles at Ukraine. For example, the one on Monday that hit the children's hospital, and other Russian missiles have fallen in NATO territory in Poland. We are not talking about NATO shooting anything, simply having something in place to be able to defend itself if Russia chose to be aggressive against NATO territory. That is a different condition. Russia should not try to threaten NATO about what NATO can do on NATO territory. Russia is the one that is actually hitting NATO territory with its missiles and organizing massive sabotage attacks across the alliance. Now, this is a true threat. Russia has to show this bluster. It has to be for its own audiences, very vocal about any changes. I don't think we should be especially concerned about reactions. Will they exercise? Different question. It's not going to result in an attack on the alliance.
The U.S., looking at the pledges made to Ukraine, has promised a lot, but it seems unwilling to loosen the restrictions on how the Ukrainians can use the weapons supplied to them by Washington. How big of a blow is that for President Zelensky?
This is, of course, a disappointment to President Zelensky. The question is, how does he make the attacks stop? It's important to have the air defense systems that Biden announced on Tuesday. This will knock something out of the sky. But it's really important also for Ukraine to be able to stop the attack where it starts. And it's clear that that movement is not going to happen right now. We've seen an iterative approach by Washington and by the whole alliance to providing aid. And many things that were off the table 2 years ago are now firmly everyday practice. This comes to whether or not there are tanks. F-16s, we have heard repeatedly at the summit today, are going to be flying in Ukraine later this summer. That also was a red line. Providing ATACMS, these longer range weapons, also was off the table until it wasn't. Striking within Russia was off the table until it wasn't. And so again, we're going to see a process of iterative development, and it's very hard to anticipate when the dam will break and when there's going to be, again, a new decision, but there is a constant pressure to move forward. But Zelensky and, as we saw clip 2 of Andrei Yermak, have been very grateful for the support that NATO has given at this summit. And that is a remarkable contrast to last year, where anger and disappointment was paramount. And here, gratitude for the serious support that NATO allies have given is much more the tone and the message that Ukrainians are pushing.
I want to talk about the communique. I'm sure you've seen it. It kind of seems like the language has changed a bit on Ukraine. We're no longer talking about victory, but more of success or of Ukraine prevailing. What do you read into that?
Language changes. The most important word that was debated in advance of this summit declaration was the word irreversible. Does Ukraine have an irreversible path to joining the alliance? That word is in the final communique, and I think many people are very happy about that. There are some caveats in terms of democratic and security progress. There is a need for Ukraine to keep making that progress, to be accountable to the alliance. This is something we have seen thus far, and of course that is not a relationship that is going to be eased. Ukraine is under tremendous pressure to show that it is up for it. That will continue. But the language about victory, it's interesting. Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor, spoke here today, and he very much spoke about success for Ukraine and failure for Russia. This is a shift in words. I don't think we quite know what this means. How is success different from victory? How is failure different from loss? Are the words victory and loss too cataclysmic in a way? Is failure and success more palatable? And can we define success in a more flexible way? In some ways, potentially this can help Ukraine finish and complete its path towards Euro-Atlantic integration, to getting into the European Union, to receiving a letter of invitation for NATO. But again, there's a concern that all of this feels a little squishy. It is imprecise. How does Ukraine remain in the strongest possible position, and how does Russia learn that its invasion of Ukraine was a catastrophic failure and one that it should not attempt anywhere else? The lack of repetition is going to be very important. But again, there is wordplay. And I think what is important is to show actual progress on the front lines and political change in the longer term to make sure that the NATO club does, in fact, eventually include Ukraine, and that the stakes of attacking Ukraine in the future would be so catastrophic that Ukrainians would feel safe sending their children for cancer treatment in a hospital, not worrying that a missile is going to hit them while they are there.
That was Kristine Berzina of the German Marshall Fund. Thank you so much for all those insights.
Thank you.